Good evening, and welcome to another Mountain Musings. And this is our last in the bit for Advent. I trust and hope and pray that your Advent time has been wonderful. I know that we have enjoyed time with our children. Not really kids anymore, they're all into their 30s, but they came and we enjoyed time together and was able to spend time with my nephews and even was privileged to perform wedding for my niece and her fiance. That was uh, something that made me more nervous than I expected. I'd performed weddings before, and as a colonel in the Army and a teacher, I'm used to public speaking, but for a variety of reasons, I was rather concerned about that and was very glad that we were able to make it through without any problems. In this last of the Advent material, I want to talk a little bit about uh, the Incarnation, a subject that has confounded and blessed and made people happy for millennia. And in this short video, I cannot hope to cover the entirety of the Advent and what it means for you and for me. But we can at least touch the hem of the garment, as it were. So let's enjoy this last moment of Advent. The passage that we'll be reading is John's recording of Advent, found in John chapter 1. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or of husband's will, but born of God. John chapter 1, verses 9 through 13. In this passage, we read John's discussion of Advent, how he viewed it. And unlike Matthew or Luke, which take a more historical approach to Advent, John takes a very inward look toward Advent. And that's what I want to talk about this evening, the inward Advent. In John's description of Advent, we see this interesting passage where it talks about us not receiving him or us not recognizing him in some passages. And part of the problem that we face is that the advent of Christ came in a way that we did not expect. We expect God to come in big and bold ways. We don't expect God to come as an infant child, and consequently, we don't recognize Him, and we don't understand that in the infant, in Jesus, we see the fullness of God. In Colossians chapter 1, we read, "For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross." Colossians chapter 1, verse 19. You see, when we see Jesus, whether we see him as an infant in the manger or we see him as a grown man striding across the hills and plains of Palestine, or if we look at him on the cross, we see God. And for most of us, Jesus presents himself in a way that we do not expect, especially in the manger. Yet God chose to become weak for you and I. He chose to become an infant for you and I. And I will not go into all the theological implications, but the bottom line is man messed up the world through sin, and a man, through Jesus, had to fix the problem. So when you and I consider Advent, when we consider God, when we consider Jesus, we have to make sure that we're willing to see Jesus the infant and understand that in a very sublime and important way, the infant Jesus reveals the vulnerability of God. And that's not something that we think about, God being vulnerable. So, as we talk about the idea of the incarnation and the vulnerability of God, which is where I want to camp and close this out, God makes himself vulnerable for you and for me. And when we see Jesus in the manger, when we see him as an infant, we have to understand that that is God there. And that is what God does. He makes himself vulnerable for us. He is willing and able to set aside all the power and the might and come as an infant in order to save us. There's much more involved in the incarnation. Cannot hope to cover all of the incarnation in these short few minutes. And you wouldn't want to sit through all my thoughts regarding the incarnation. But think about how you and I, we cherish our power. As I watched my parents age out, I watched them have to deal with the fact of their waning physical capabilities, their, in my mother's case, waning mental faculties, and watch them come to grips with that. And this Advent, as I've thought about Jesus, realize that he gave up all his power and his might to come and to save me, to come and to help me out. And that's an amazing act of love. I wonder if I would be able to do that, to love someone enough to set aside my power, weak as it is, my abilities, weak as they are, my mental faculties. Always remember that part of Jesus becoming vulnerable was that he allowed himself to have to learn. Scripture tells us that he grew in wisdom and in power and in favor with God and man. He grew up. So he went to school. He had to learn to do the things that he needed to do. Uh, and to me, that's just astounding that he would do that, that he would love me enough to set aside his power and his might to serve me. So when I think about the incarnation, when I think about the fact that in the infant Jesus, the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, I have to come to grips with the fact that Jesus loved me enough to do that. And though I cannot explain it all, I do know that in doing that, it says in Colossians, he redeemed all of us. All who call upon his name, who are born of him, are redeemed by his great and gracious gift. I thank you for joining me. And as I said, I hope and pray that your Advent season was worthwhile and that you enjoyed yourself. As always, leave a comment, leave a like, or if you want, share. But whatever, May God bless you in this new year. And as you reflect on the waning moments of Advent, may you be filled with joy and peace and wonder at the great gift of God. Good evening.